A long, long time ago, in the heart of a village called Kankan, there lived a strong and proud man called Bupu, known for his bravery. The villagers often spoke of his strength, and he believed there was nothing he could not do. One day, he stood in the village square, his voice loud and full of confidence, and made a bold promise to the people. "I will not eat the sweet palm nuts until I have killed 12 elephants and 7 lions," he declared. The villagers, amazed by his words, looked at him with both awe and disbelief. They knew that hunting such mighty animals would be a great challenge, but they also knew that the man was fearless. With his promise made, the man set off into the deep forest, ready to prove his strength. Little did he know, the journey would test not just his bravery, but his ability to keep his word. As he walked, the forest was full of temptation, for the palm nuts hung ripe and waiting. But the man refused to eat them. At least, that was his plan. And so began the journey that would change his life forever, as the villagers of Kankan watched, waiting to see if the man would truly keep his promise. In the village of Kankan, a man called Bupu stood tall and proud, telling everyone, "I will only eat the sweet palm nuts when I kill 12 elephants and 7 lions." The villagers laughed at his words, but admired his confidence. He wasn't afraid of anything. The man believed he could conquer anything in the wild, and no one could stop him. "I'll prove I'm stronger than all," he said, his voice filled with pride. With that, he packed his bag, grabbed his spear, and set off into the forest. He was determined to keep his word. The palm nuts hanging from trees were tempting, but he wouldn't eat them until his hunt was over. He believed that he had to defeat the mighty animals first, and only then would he reward himself. As Bupu walked through the dense forest, the sound of birds singing filled the air. He didn't pay attention to the beauty of the forest. His mind was focused on his mission. Suddenly, he saw a palm tree up ahead, its branches heavy with ripe palm nuts. The sight made his stomach growl, and the smell of the fruit made him stop in his tracks. He looked at the palm nut, glistening under the sun, so tempting. But he remembered his promise. "No, I must hunt the lions and elephants first," he told himself. He shook his head, trying to ignore the fruit. The longer he stared at the palm nut, the harder it became to resist. But he walked past it, determined not to break his vow. His journey was just beginning, and he still had far to go. The man continued walking deeper into the forest. The thick trees cast long shadows, and the air smelled of fresh earth and leaves. As he walked, more and more palm nuts appeared in his path. There was one hanging on a tree just ahead, then another by the river, and even more along the trail. Every time he saw one, his hunger grew. He could almost taste the sweet, juicy pulp. But the man gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. "I haven't hunted the elephants or lions yet," he reminded himself, "so I can't eat the fruit." With each palm nut he passed, the temptation grew stronger. His thoughts began to cloud, and his steps slowed. Yet, his resolve stayed firm. He couldn't eat the palm nuts, not yet. He was a man of his word, and his pride wouldn't allow him to break his promise. The man's body was tired, and his stomach growled louder with every step. The heat of the sun beat down on him as he trudged through the thick brush. He had been hunting for days, but had not found a single elephant or lion. Doubt started creeping into his mind. "What if I never find them?" he thought. Just then, he saw another palm nut. This one was bigger than the others, its shell shining in the sunlight. He felt the hunger grow inside him. His pride began to fade, and his willpower weakened. "I've walked so far. I deserve a reward," he thought. Without thinking, he reached up, grabbed the palm nut, and bit into it. It was sweet, juicy, and satisfying. But as soon as he took a bite, he realized what he had done. He had broken his promise. A wave of shame washed over him. As Bupu finished eating the palm nut, a small bird flew down from a tree nearby. It was a little bird called Papawa, known for its sharp eyes and clever tongue. Papawa had been watching the man from the trees and saw everything. "Ha! You've broken your promise," the bird chirped loudly. "You said you would eat the palm nut only after killing 12 elephants and 7 lions, but here you are, eating it without even trying." The man froze, his face turning red. The bird wasn't wrong. He had promised, but his hunger had driven him to forget his words. The Papawa wasn't finished. "Now everyone in Kankan will know what you've done," the bird warned. Bupu's heart sank as he realized that the bird would tell everyone in the village about his failure. With a heavy heart, Bupu began the long walk back to Kankan. He felt defeated, not by the lions or elephants, but by his own weakness. The palm nut's sweetness still lingered on his lips, and guilt gnawed at him. He had broken his promise in front of nature itself. As he walked, he saw villagers in the distance, but they weren't coming to greet him with excitement. They already knew. The small bird, Papawa, had flown back to the village and told everyone about his failure. "The mighty hunter has eaten the palm nut," the bird had cried. "He didn't even try to kill the lions or elephants." The villagers were waiting for him, their faces filled with disappointment. The man hung his head in shame as he walked past them. The whole village had heard of his broken vow. As Bupu entered Kankan, he felt the eyes of everyone on him. The villagers stood in a circle, whispering and laughing. "So, the great hunter has eaten the palm nut without doing what he promised," one villager chuckled. "I guess the mighty hunter isn't so mighty after all," another said, shaking his head. The man stood there, his face burning with shame. He wanted to speak, to explain himself, but the words wouldn't come. The Papawa had spread the news so quickly that there was no hiding his failure. The villagers laughed, not out of cruelty, but because they had expected more from him. The man had boasted so loudly, and yet now he stood before them, empty-handed. They murmured, "The man who promised the impossible, but couldn't even keep a simple vow." Later that day, the village elder called the man to her hut. She sat him down and spoke gently. "You have learned a hard lesson today," she said, her voice kind but firm. "A promise is a powerful thing. It is a word that holds weight, and breaking it dishonors you." Bupu nodded, tears in his eyes. "I didn't mean to break my promise," he said quietly, "but I couldn't resist the palm nut." The elder smiled softly. "The temptation to break promises will always be there, but strength doesn't come from the actions you boast of. It comes from the actions you actually do." She paused, looking at him kindly. "Learn from this mistake, and remember that a true warrior is one who keeps their word, no matter the cost." Bupu spent the night thinking about the elder's words. He lay awake, staring at the stars. "I have failed," he thought, "but I can still learn from this." The next morning, he went to the elders and asked for their guidance. He didn't speak of hunting or promises. Instead, he spoke of humility and self-discipline. Slowly, the villagers forgave him. They saw that he had learned from his mistake. No one ever asked him to hunt lions or elephants again, but they all remembered the lesson he had learned. To keep one's word was more important than any great feat of strength. In the end, Bupu became known as someone who learned the value of honesty and integrity. He no longer boasted about impossible tasks, but focused on simple promises he could keep. As time passed, the villagers came to respect him, not for his strength, but for his growth. The man never forgot the lesson of the palm nut. He understood now that action spoke louder than words, and a true promise came from the heart, not from boasting. The man lived the rest of his days quietly, knowing that the greatest strength came from keeping his word. no matter how small the task seemed. The moral of the story is a promise made in pride can lead to failure, but a promise kept in humility leads to true strength. Thank you for watching, and turn in for more stories from the Grebo Legends and Myths Folktales channel.